Moving on with this life thing, Dr. Orin Davis. Dr. Orin C. Davis is a self-actualization engineer who focuses on enabling people to do and be their best. His consulting work is centered on maximizing human capital and making workplaces great places to work. In his research, specialties are self-actualization, flow, creativity, hypnosis, and mentoring. Dr. Davis is a lecturer in critical and creative thinking at UMass Boston and an adjunct professor of psychology at Baruch College. He is also the principal investigator of the Quality of Life Laboratory, the chief science officer of Self-Spark, and a science advisor to Happify. He earned the first doctorate in positive psychology from Claremont Graduate University and did his baccalaureate degree in neuroscience at Brandeis University. Ladies and gentlemen, speaking on help yourself to self-help, Dr. Orin Davis.
I want to share with you one of my favorite sales pitches. Looks like that. These are a bunch of people that want you to pay them for the privilege of telling you what to do. Now, how does that sound? How many of you like it when people tell you what to do? Let alone, how willing are you to pay people for the privilege of telling you what to do? That sounds kind of odd, especially when you consider the fact that most of the advice that you're reading is actually rather generic. It's not really tailored to you. The people who write this, they have no idea who you are. They have no idea what your life is like. They have no idea how you've bent, contorted, twisted yourself to deal with the contingencies that you call life. But you're going to pay them to tell you what to do. That seems kind of strange. What's even more strange is how generic advice can really be. Even those of us who do research in positive psychology, our results are based on inferences that come from averages. Yes, they may be randomized control trials, and yes, we may be finding an effect across the mean. But they're still averages. They're still based on a general group, and the extent to which they apply to you may not work so well. So as much as our results are theory-based, data-driven, and jargon-laden, your mileage may vary. The other problem we run into in the advice industry is this thing called best practices. The idea that if we can find all the successful people, and we figure out what made them all successful, then if we do that, we'll be successful too. That doesn't work out nearly as well as we'd like to believe. Because the problem is, the people who may have tried the very same strategies and failed, and we don't know who they are. Because if you fail, you fall off the radar. We don't track you. We don't know how you failed. We don't know why you failed. And we certainly don't know what percentage of the people that used the strategy succeeded and failed. So how willing would you be to try these best practices if you found out that only 10% of the people that use them succeed? How about if it were 1%? Even if it were 20%? Are you sure that you want to try these best practices? For the matter of that, how similar is your definition of success to that of the people we studied? Do you want what they have? Do you want to be like them? Because their contingencies are different. Their lives are different. Their goals are different. And so are yours. You've got your own path. You should walk it yourself. But that, of course, raises a very important question. Who are you? Because if you're going to be somebody interesting, you're going to have to reverse engineer all the information you're given. You go to school, you get an education, you're learning stuff. But the only thing you can do with that stuff is deal with it passively unless you choose to deal with it actively. So what you need to do is reverse engineer the material to your life. You have to take the material, whether it's in your classes, whether it's from articles, whether it's from books, you've got to reverse engineer it to who you are. And you've got to ask the question, who am I? What am I doing? Where am I going? Because you can't reverse engineer this information until you know who you are and you know where you're going and you know what you want and at least have some semblance of a definition of what success means to you. But if we want to get there from here, we're going to have to understand the science of change. Now, there are two sciences of change. One is psychology, the other one's chemistry. So you've probably seen this diagram of a chemical reaction before. And the thing is, if we want to change to a better state, unfortunately, that takes a lot of energy. And when we see a better state, there's a mountain of energy in front of us, and that makes change scary. Because we're going to have to put in a lot to change. Worse than that, in many cases, we're climbing our own mountain of change right now. And so if somebody gives us a perspective of a life that may be better than the one that we have, then what we're going to have to do is take all the energy to go back down the mountain we've been climbing, then we've got to go to the other mountain, then we've got to climb that mountain, and then we'll be in a better place. Rinse and repeat. But the problem here is that the advice we're given is often way too much of a mountain to climb. The advice is generic, and so is the path. And that path may be too much for us to do. So we need some kind of catalyst to make this an easier mountain to climb. And that catalyst is reverse engineering. When we take the advice we're given and we reverse engineer it for ourselves, then we're finding a path to there from here, our path. One that fits us and one that is consistent with our contingencies, our goals, our definition of success, which is a lot better than just the generic advice. But in order to do that, we're going to need the courage to do three things. The first is to face down the emotions that may hold us back. Change is hard. It's easy for me to stand up here and talk about change, talk about reverse engineering, tell you about the fact that this will catalyze a path to self-actualization, but that doesn't change the fact that we experience a number of emotions, a number of challenges, and a number of difficulties, and the fact that it takes a lot of energy to change. Thankfully, science does give us one hint, because research on emotions does show that we're not as good at predicting our emotions as we think. So what we need is the courage to hold our noses, jump through it, and recognize this really isn't going to be as bad as I fear it's going to be. The second thing we need to do is have the courage to accept the visions of ourselves that others can provide. When people give us advice, especially those close to us, they're giving us a sense of who we could be. And I can tell you that when people engage in the reflected best self exercise, they ask people, what am I like at my best? Or when they do serious introductions and they tell a story about themselves at their best, they're often very surprised to discover just how incredible they can be. And when I do this as an exercise in my courses, students are amazed to discover the amount of personal awesomeness that exists in the room with them at that time. So what we need is the courage to accept the fact that we could be better. Now, here's the thing, and this is the caveat. Who wants to find out about a better version of themselves that they can't access? This is what sometimes prevents us from listening to advice. Because we don't want to hear the fact that we could be better than we are, but that we're not going to be able to get there. That would really bother us. And that's probably worse than not knowing. But I disagree. Because if we know, then maybe we can reverse engineer that vision to where we are. And that means we need the courage to reverse engineer advice. We need to believe that we can get there from here. We need to believe that we really do have what it takes. We may not be able to walk that generic path that someone's given us, but we might be able to take a look at what that path is, compare it to the lives that we live, to the people we are, and say, yes, this is possible. But that takes courage too. But we have to remember that reverse engineering is a catalyst, and it really will lower the activation energy, and it really can give us an opportunity at self-actualization. And so I would suggest that the most important thing we need to do is be fearless. Thank you.